we can look at this from a couple of points of view. Let's say that the program's already completed. Well, it might be just a simple case of pressing a button and it transmits, and it goes from the radio station to a radio, or it could be a computer, or it could be someone's mobile phone, but it just gets transmitted by a network of transmitters not over 90 years ago. So that's a straightforward answer, but it's not going to get me very far, so we'll move on. It's really an answer, I think, that requires looking in books or doing other kind of secondary research. And the Radio Handbook by Carol Fleming is very useful, as is a book that's come out recently called What Do We Mean by Local? And when you are producing something like a news broadcast, you tend not to think about the distribution, you think about the actual production part of it. But books give you the information that you need to find out about how the institution of radio works. And also part of the research means using a search engine and finding out what's out there on the World Wide Web. And there's something called the Radio Academy. And what I discovered was that you don't just have BBC radio, you also have commercial radio, and they're about 50-50. About half of the industry is the BBC, and the other half is commercial. And what I'm going to be looking at is the commercial side rather than the BBC. The point is looking at both because they have very similar but different ways of distributing their local radio news and radio programmes generally. So looking at the commercial side of it. And there are three big groups, really, three big players. Lots of competition in British local radio, but the three big ones are Global Radio, Bauer, and UTV. And the biggest of all of those is Global Radio. And what we discover really is that in order to distribute, which is the biggest part of an institution's job, you need to have resources, and the bigger the better when it comes to distribution. And they have a saying at Global that says national brands delivered locally. And looking into the research, discovered that actually Global have got offices in London and in Los Angeles. You can see them there, look, that one and that one. And what I wanted to say here really is that news feeds, yeah, the biggest organisation that has ever to news feed is called IRN, but globally so big it doesn't actually need to use IRN. It has its own way of, like the BBC, has its own way of actually having the power and then the network, the internet capacity to be able to distribute lots and lots of news to lots and lots of different small local radio stations all the time, constantly keeping it going. Now the independent radio news, so we're looking at that side, they are a special organisation that feeds lots and lots of radio stations. And there you can see here, if I choose a different colour, we can see, oops, didn't choose a different colour, but anyway, all of these different radio stations they depend on the IRN to supply them with news, because they couldn't do it by themselves. And this actually comes from their website, this bit here. So, you know, they're making a point about how brilliant they are as a company. Well, news and the media's big business, because it obviously, you know, governments are interested in it because it's to do with money and it's to do with influencing people's opinion. But any commercial company like Global or Bauer have got to actually pass a test. And there's an Office for Communication which the government have set up. And you can't broadcast in this country unless you have a license, and that's a quality license. You have to actually pass a quality test before you're allowed to. And Ofcom is that a key part of making sure that what's distributed is reliable and has a certain quality. So, why would anybody bother to distribute the local radio news bulletin that we've made? Well, let's have a look at this. Orion Media, well, they're not as big as Global. They're in competition with Global, but they published something on their website recently about the industry. And what it tells you is that you can make a lot of money. And Global had bought the GMG radio group in the summer of 2012, 3 years ago, and it grew too big. And the Competition Commission, which is a bit like Ofcom, it's just keeping an eye on things for the government, said that Global had grown too big in Britain, and they had to sell off 8 of their radio stations. And they were bought by a company called, what are they called? Communicorp, that's it, they're just over here, look, Communicorp. But Communicorp actually paid £35 million for those 8 radio stations. So why was that? Well, because it all makes money. That's the point. It makes money. And that's why a media institution is bothered to actually distribute our local radio news.